So, who can guess from the cover of the book what we're going to be learning about today? Yeah, we're going to be learning about George Washington. So, we're going to read this book, and it's called The Childhood Stories of George Washington by Karen Follett. Okay, so George Washington was America's first president. You can see this picture of him on the dollar bill. There are so many stories about George Washington's childhood. The most famous story is about a cherry tree. One day, George's grandfather gave him a little hatchet. A hatchet's kind of like an axe. And George wanted to try it out. The trees in the woods just looked way too big. But there was a pretty cherry tree in the garden. George swung the hatchet, and he chopped down on the first tree. Crash! Then he went off to play. George's father was very angry when he saw the tree. "Who cut down my beautiful tree?" he said. If George didn't say anything, no one would have known. But George said, "I did it. I cannot tell a lie." Another story is about George's horse. One morning, George went to the stable and asked the stableman to give him the best horse in their barn. He asked the stableman, and the stableman was afraid, but he gave George the horse. George took the horse out, and he joined the big fox hunt, but the horse hurt its foot. George's mother saw the limping horse. She got very mad at the stableman. She was going to punish him harshly, but George said, "Mom, I made him do it." Here is another horse story. George's mother had a wild horse. No one knew how to ride it, but George and his friends decided to try. George hopped on the horse, and the horse bucked and tumbled, and George hung on tight. But the horse had a bad heart, and the horse fell over and couldn't get up. George and his friends were very upset. They didn't want to see the horse hurt. George's mother came home, and she asked about the horse. "I'm so sorry I hurt the horse," George said. George's mother was still mad. But she was proud of George. It takes courage to admit when you've done something wrong. George Washington was very honest, and honesty helped him become America's very first president. Okay, so we're going to learn about George Washington, and we're going to learn about his whole life, not just when he was a kid. Okay, George Washington. So, the first place we're going is Ferry Farms. Who can tell me what they think Ferry Farm is? Yeah, maybe it was where he rode the horses. What do we think about this little house over here? Yeah, that was George Washington's original house. Do we live in houses bigger than that? Yeah, we do. So we're going to learn about his childhood. So George Washington was born on February 22nd, 1732 in Westmoreland, Virginia. He started school when he was 6 years old, and they moved to Ferry Farms. But he had to leave school at 15 to go and work. He had a big family of 2 brothers and 3 sisters. His favorite food was mashed sweet potatoes with coconut, but he also liked his vegetables. He loved green beans with mushrooms. And here's a picture of George Washington when he was a kid, and we see his siblings around him in this picture too, like his little sister right down here. So young George Washington. So he stopped homeschooling, like I said, at 15, and he became what is called a surveyor. A surveyor is someone who overlooks the land or surveys the land. That's what he's doing in this picture up in the top left. See right there? Yep, he surveyed the land, which means he mapped it out. He was also what we call a cartographer. This is a person who makes maps. Back then, they didn't have maps on their phones, or they could just look up a location. It was very important. So they had to do it to find their ways around, to find other places. So at 22, he became a leader of a militia. This is a group of soldiers. It's like a small army. And within less than a year, he already had moved up in rank, which means he was given a higher position. And he was in charge of all the soldiers in Virginia at the young age of 23. That's pretty young. That's just a little bit older than me. And as an adult, George Washington grew to become one of our biggest presidents. He was 6'2". That's a whole foot taller than me. That's about this tall. Isn't that crazy? And he was 200 pounds. And he was one of our most respected generals. And we know this because he was the only general in his time who stayed with the troops out in the freezing winters. They were in the cold for over 6 months in below freezing weather, which means it was so cold. There was ice everywhere and snow. They were up in the northern part of the U.S. And he is the only man in history to have received 100% of the votes to become president. This is because he was so well liked and respected. He was respected because, like we read in the story, he was really honest and he was always telling the truth, and he was really hardworking as a general for his troops. Did we recognize him? Where do you think we recognize him? We see him everywhere, and he's green. We read at the beginning of the book, it said it. That's right, he's on the dollar bill. And this is a picture that is on the dollar bill, and it says Washington at the bottom. So next time you see with your parents, you see money, ask to see a $1 bill, and you'll see him on there. There's also something else he's on. Can we guess? It's silver. It's round. Yeah, on a coin. It's on the quarter. He's on the U.S. quarter. This is a picture of a quarter, and this is him with his hair. What color is his hair again? That's right, it's white. So George Washington is the only president to be on 2 different things besides Abraham Lincoln. So he's on the dollar bill and the quarter. Can we remember that? Okay. And you can visit him. So if you want to see what George Washington looks like in person, you can see him on what we call Mount Rushmore. He was one of our beloved presidents, and he was such an important person to our nation's history that we engraved his face onto a mountain, which they call Mount Rushmore. There are 3 other presidents on it too. So Abraham Lincoln, Theodore Roosevelt, and Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson was actually one of his best friends. They were in the army together, and they actually ended up writing the Constitution, which is our founding document for the United States. And so can we guess how big his face is? 20 feet? Yeah, that's pretty big. You think it's as tall as me? Yeah, it's taller than me. It is 60 feet long. Isn't that crazy? That is huge. That's like a bunch. That is a lot of me. And then can we guess how tall his nose is? How long his nose is? Yeah, that's about right. About 6 feet. It was 6.5 feet. That's actually his height. So it was about this tall. Yep, that's a big nose. So that's all we're going to learn about George Washington today. But we are going to